obviously is important and people get excited about them, and the trails in and of themselves have a huge impact on communities, from getting people out just living healthy, active lives to revitalizing their culture, their language, all that stuff that we see has such a strong impact on the communities that we get to work with. But we've always known that that wasn't really the thing that we were doing, or at least it wasn't the, why everybody was so excited. And I think for me, what it's become more and more evident is it's really about the power of transformative storytelling. Because we'd go to a community and we'd tell stories about trails, we tell stories about the other communities that we've worked with, but we're always telling this sort of grand narrative about reconnecting to the land, about overcoming and communities digging their way out from under colonialism. And it's always that story that I think why people got it so quickly and why it gained so much traction. And I think when I was going to communities back before we even met, and I was working as a community planner, and I'd go to a community and I'd be working on a comprehensive community plan or a land use plan or whatever, I didn't have a good story. I wasn't telling good stories. And I didn't have a way of tapping into that deeper narrative that's already happening in the community. That's kind of the thing, is that by using storytelling and having a story, we're able to position ourselves and kind of tap into that underlying narrative that is going on in every First Nation community. That narrative about reclaiming lands, escaping from the yoke of colonialism, as it were, revitalizing themselves and re-emerging as the caretakers of the land. That's a story that's always there in the background of their minds. And the reason our program has been successful is because we're able to connect with that story, and that they see us as, rather than seeing us as a threat or a perpetuation of the problems, they're we're able to create a narrative where we're allies and we want to try and figure this out. And part of that story is us trying to figure it out. What does it mean to be doing this? What does it mean to be an ally? And I think that's why this short edit that's being released on Crankworks and Return to Earth with Anthill, so it just shows how important the storytelling piece of that is.
So I think that's really, really good. And that is super interesting to me. What I'm trying to understand then, is it us? Is it you and me who are the story, who make the story? Or is it the project itself? Is it really about trails? Is the essence of what we do trail work, or is the essence storytelling, and that creates the interest in the community?
Well, I think the trails, actually go back to the first part of what you asked there. I think there's several different narratives that are happening in each scenario, right? So there's the story of the project, there's the story of the community, there's the stories of the kids who come up and build with us, and then there's our story, two white dudes doing this work, trying to figure out what it means to be here. So all those narratives are happening at once. They're all interconnected and playing off each other. And the trail itself is what you would call in the literary world, and I can't remember if I'm saying this right, but what's called a MacGuffin. I can't remember if that's the exact word. I'll have to look it up. But a MacGuffin is any device that moves a plot forward. So you think about Pulp Fiction is a great example, right? Quentin Tarantino, absolutely beyond genius storyteller, and in the briefcase that everybody is looking for and holds, the theory being that it holds the soul of Maurice, one of the main characters. That's a MacGuffin. It moves the story. It's a plot device that creates a situation in which the characters can manifest their narrative arcs, right? It's the thing that triggers everything that's happening. And I think that's what a trail basically is within the work that we do. It's not the story in of itself. It's a story device. It's the MacGuffin on which we all come together and act out our narrative arcs.
Okay.
You know, and it's a really, and it's, you know, as far as people in general go, like humanity, that's really what trails have always been, right? And that's what I mean when I say every trail has a story or is a story. Like that's what I'm talking about. Like when you walk on a trail, you know, you're a different person from when you start on that trail to when you end. And that's what every story is. Story is about change.
Yeah.
Right? And it's the device in which sort of propels us all to come together.
Right.
And to move our little narrative arc forward in some way or another. And we're all changed by the time that project is done, by the time the community trail is done, whatever it is.
I find that really interesting because if trails is what moves our story forward, at the same time it's also what opens doors for us. The ever increasing interest in trail development, in recreational infrastructure development in general, is what gets us into those indigenous communities that we're working with, and then almost as soon as we start a project, that's when change happens. That's when most of the communities, I'd say, that we worked with in the past 4, 5, 6 years realize that this is beyond the actual construction work. This is about leaving capacity in the community. This is about partnership building. This is about us two white dudes coming as friends or coming as allies and leaving as friends. So I really like that thought. I think it's worth capturing it, that while trails is what moves the story forward, it's also what gets us in the door. It's our opener.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why it's been such a powerful device to create those opportunities. Because I think when you start talking to people about trails, it's kind of an easy thing for people to wrap their head around, and to also sort of project their vision or their understanding of the possibilities of trails onto that thing. You know, like everybody knows what a trail is. They have probably positive memories of trails in some form or another. It's been a huge part of their cultural, you know, heritage. Like they've always used trails. So, like for example, like I think when I used to go to communities and work with them, say on a comprehensive community plan or whatever, like it's a very ethereal concept, and it's laden with all kinds of colonial history. You know, like the white guy coming in and be like, oh, we're going to do this land use plan. Like there's a lot of history about.
So let's step back a few years and tell YouTube out there why we are working together. How did we meet? How did our business partnership got started, both on the former Aboriginal Youth Mountain Bike AYMBP side, now we call it the Indigenous Youth Mountain Bike Program. How did our story get started? From your point of view, I'm sure we can both tell the story, and we would both tell it maybe a little bit different. So tell YouTube how we got started, and then maybe we can look at why we view this as a success.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to hear it from your perspective as well. Okay, so I'll go first. Like, for me, how we met and how it all started was, I had already started at the time, the Aboriginal Youth Mountain Bike Program, and after working with the Boothroyd Boothroyd Indian Band, that's how they refer to themselves.
Yeah.
And I think I'd already worked with the Tahltan First Nation up north. So I had a couple projects, but I had just formed the Indigenous Youth Mountain Bike Program and was kind of trying to figure it out. And was traveling around the province, meeting with all these different groups, kind of pitching the idea. It still wasn't gaining any traction. And at that point, it was still just about mountain biking for me, right? Like, I built the bike park in Boothroyd. I didn't know what I had. I felt like there was something to it, but I didn't know what it was yet, you know? And I'd gone and talked to a bunch of different communities, and, you know, they were always so patient and open to listening, but ultimately it wasn't gaining any traction. And I couldn't figure out why. And then that changed when I was approached by Miriam Schilling, who was working as the economic development coordinator for the Hatsuel First Nation outside of Williams Lake, the community that you had already at that point a very long history with. I'd never met them before, didn't know anything about them, and she approached me at the World Indigenous Tourism Conference in Whistler where I spoke, and and I told a story about regional tourism initiatives. Right now, you and we kind of crossed paths a bit, but we hadn't really met yet. And at that time, I was doing the Northern BC tourism strategy. So I was working with all these communities across Northern BC, trying to figure out a project in which we had very little to almost no input from First Nations along that corridor, which I saw as a huge gaping hole.
Which seems crazy now.
It is. It was crazy then, and it's crazy now. But I was still at that point trying to figure out how to engage with First Nations on that particular project. So thankfully, the good folks at Indigenous Tourism BC gave me the chance to speak. So I spoke, and one of the people who approached me afterwards, there's a bunch of folks who approached me afterwards, but one of them was Miriam. And I remember her talking, like we were just talking off to the side, and she's like, well, there's this German guy, Thomas, who's been, talking with us for a while about wanting to do mountain bike trails, but we're not really sure. The elders aren't very comfortable with this, which was something I'd heard frequently. I'd be working with the Taltan, or I'd be working with Lakatma people and talking about trails and getting super excited about it. And it was often elders being like, this is just going to mean more people on our land. This is going to mean garbage. This is going to mean people impacting our cultural sensitive sites. Like, they were really not cool with the idea at all. And usually that's where it kind of stopped. So, she kind of repeated that, and I was like, well, let's just sort of see what happens. This sounds like really exciting. So we got funding from the New Relationship Trust, and she brought me up. And for me, how this all went down is I remember arriving in Hatsuel, and we were at that little community center in the community, and there was quite a big turnout. I remember there was 30 or 40 people there. I was like, holy moly. For me, this was huge. Usually I show up to a community and I'm stoked if there's 5 or 6 people, a dozen is a huge turnout. Usually it's because there's a good meal, and I just do my little horse and pony show. And what I always remember about this experience, though, is that Chief Bev Sellers got up and spoke before me, and Mount Poli had just happened a few months before, or not even. And so she got up and she gave this really powerful presentation talking about the mining disaster and the impact that it had on their lands, and it was brutal. There's I don't know how many tons of toxic sludge that was released into ultimately Quesnel Lake and all those surrounding environments. It was right in their backyard, and they were understandably extremely upset about it. So she spoke, and she showed picture after picture of just landscapes completely inundated with industrial waste and all this horrible stuff. And everybody was really upset, and they had a discussion afterwards, and there was a little bit of arguing. They were talking how are we going to get we need to be able to shut down the company, or we need to get them to clean this up. This is you can really feel the emotional burden in the room, this major environmental disaster. And then I got up to speak. And in classic naive form, I had this presentation with all these photos of guys on big gnarly bikes with the full face helmets and goggles, and they look kind of not really human, like aliens, and there's pictures of them ripping down the sides of mountains, and rooster tails of dirt flying out behind them and chucking themselves off these big jumps, and I'm up there and I juxtaposed against the images that Bev had just shown. I was I was trying to show this, being like, mountain biking is really fun, and it'd be good for your kids. And I look out at the audience, and all I could see is people just looking at, like, oh my God, like, you know, all they could see was white dudes on bikes shredding up their land, you know. And I realized in that moment, it's like, this is no different, really. You know, I mean, yeah, you'd be like, oh, come on, bikes don't have the same impact as in mining disasters. True. But it's still coming from the same mindset, that exploitative, consumer-driven, you know, extracts, like, basically it was like extracting experiences from the land to satisfy, like, this sort of consumer driven relationship with the land. And in that moment for me, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I can't do this anymore. I just remember kind of reached over and shut the laptop, and I looked out at the audience, and they're all just kind of staring at me. And I saw this dude, tall, kind of lanky looking dude with a baseball cap on, with, like, I think had a rooster on it. It said, you know, the cock or something really weird like that. And, you know, had a mustache and had this big grin on his face and was just grinning and bobbing his head at me. And I just latched onto that like it was a life preserver. And I just remember thinking, you know what, forget all that. Like, maybe we could just build some trails for your kids around, like, the community. Like, what would it take? What can I do to help you get your kids out on the land, live healthy, active lives, and whatever. Like, I don't care about any of this stuff. If you don't, you know, maybe, I didn't say this part, but I was like, you know, if they don't say anything, I'll just sit down and I'm done.
Yeah.
And at this point, I was ready to quit for good. I was like, done. And I forget, I think it was Ralph, actually. Ralph Phillips?
Yeah.
Ralph?
Yeah.
You know, and I think he shot out a question. It's like, well, you know, there used to be a trail behind the band office above the bridge, and that'd be really pretty. And then they just started throwing out ideas like, oh, that'd be fun. We should do a trail here. And, like, I think Miriam was like, well, there's nowhere for anybody to recreate because the only road through town is like this busy, dusty, dirty mountain road. And, you know, there's nowhere for anybody to run a train. There's a group of women who love training for the sun run, and they need a place to run. And, like, we had this really cool conversation. And I was like writing down ideas. I'm like, see, this is a good idea. Yeah. And then I met you, the head bobbing head at the back afterwards the meeting, and we went down, we looked at your Hatsel Heritage Village, which was absolutely stellar. And that's where it all started, you know. And then that's what we did is we did a plan, and we had all these trails on it. But basically, you started working with the youth, and I wasn't too involved at this point. I helped get money, I helped get funding, but I was still working at my old job, so I didn't have the type of flexibility to just come up and join in and see what it was all about, sadly. But we got that little trail done. I remember a year later, we were up and we went for a walk on that trail, and an elder came with us. It wasn't Ralph, it was somebody else. And I remember we were kind of walked up that little viewpoint that you had built with the kids over the summer, and we were standing there and looking out over the village. And I remember the elder being like, yeah, like, I've never been up here. Yeah. And I've lived here my whole life, like 67 years. I've never been up here, you know? And, like, as a planner, like, I understood the history of the development of reserves. Like, they were designed as prisons. You know, they were designed to keep Indigenous people off the land. It was designed to sever their relationships with the land, with each other, with their traditional governance, their traditional lives. And this little trail, like, the community was using this little trail their kids were digging them out from under that, you know? Right. And that, in that moment, that's where I saw the potential and the power and the story, although I wouldn't have been able to articulate it at that time, but I saw it. And I was like, that moment I got it. And because it's interesting, when I met you, like, I always felt like you understood the possibilities of what I was doing better than I did. But yeah, that's the origin story for me of, like, how we started working together, and, you know, and then just exploded from there.
That's awesome. What I didn't realize or what I didn't know about was that tidbit about Whistler that you met Miriam there at that conference. That's really cool. But man, there's so much to unpack in just what you talked about the last 5 minutes. One thing I wanna tell you and I wanna tell YouTube out there is that I had such a similar experience I don't know, 15 years prior to that meeting that you described, at the same old community hall that goes way back to the late 50s, early 60s. I think that building was constructed when I started working with the Soda Creek Indian Band back then. Now it's called the Hatsulj First Nation. When I started working with them, the chief Lenny Sellers thought it would be a great idea to do a big community presentation.
Yeah.
Similar what happened at that meeting. We set a date, we planned for a meeting at the community hall, the whole community was invited, and I totally remember I was super nervous when I showed up. Would somebody come? How many people would attend? You know, is this gonna go well? Public speaking, I was super nervous about. So I never forget that the moment I rolled up to this old community hall, this big metal building, unheated. The parking lot was just packed. Like, it was just full of cars. I don't know, like 40, 50 cars. It was insane. And I'm like, this is amazing. At the same time, I got more and more nervous. And as soon as I opened the door, it was all set up for bingo. It was the annual bingo night. Everybody forgot about the meeting. Nobody came to see that meeting. So I was there and I got pulled in to play bingo with the community on my first night meeting everyone. And it was like this big eye-opener, but it kind of broke the ice. You know, I've never played bingo before in my life. I was just in Canada for a few years. Nobody in Germany knew what bingo was. So a couple of the elders took me under their wings and they gave me the mark of the dab, and I played bingo for the first time in my life, and I had fun. I actually won a couple of things. I think I won riding spurs. It was absolutely hilarious. So it's really funny that you know, we had a similar experience in terms of these community meetings. And in terms of the presentation, I think we grew and we learned a lot over the years. With the images of the 18-year-old downhill biker with his full face helmet riding down a sandy, gnarly, steep, double black trail. They are gone. You know, now it's about hiking and trail running and mountain biking.
Kids on bikes,
family oriented. That changed a lot. But yeah, that's how it all started. Yeah. And
although we did end up building some pretty gnarly trails on Hatsul First Nation land, like
absolutely.
Oh yeah, like the separator, one of the biggest
wind feature in the interior for sure.
In the interior, if not all of BC, you know, outside of maybe like Crankworks.
And those trails are super popular. They see a lot of mountain bikers. I still think it's the largest Indigenous trail network in the province, probably closely followed by the Sim First Nations. That's a whole nother story how you got involved and then pulled me into those projects. And one thing that I often think about is, you know, when all this started, we lived in very different worlds. You know, even we physically lived in different worlds. You lived in downtown Vancouver in this stunning, beautiful apartment in Yaletown, overlooking the ocean there, the inlet, just absolutely beautiful. So right in the heart of the city, and I lived hours drive northwest of Williams Lake, completely out in the bush. Like it just couldn't have been more different, that whole scenario. And we started visiting each other. We started forming ideas. How can we take this to the next level? It really grew from there.
Good call. Smart move, man.
Yeah, awesome. Nice. Oh, this is gonna be so good.
Oh yeah.